Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here today. My name is Paulina Raniecka, and I am the Research and Communications Coordinator of the ASI Water Security and Justice Cluster and of the New Wave Network. We are honored to open today's lecture on the topic of water scarcity, applying the lens of water security, delivered by Dr. Chloé Nicolas-Artero. Our Water Security and Justice webinar series uncovers the concept of water security and water justice through 4 thematic angles. In particular, water conflict, water scarcity, water food nexus, and water mining nexus. Today's lecture is the first one of the water scarcity cluster. The lecture will last 45 minutes and will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A. We kindly ask you to use our chat for the questions. I will now pass it to Dr. Jean-Paul Delangelo, lead of New Wave and of our ASI cluster, for the introduction of Dr. Chloé Nicolas-Artero. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paulina. Thank you, Chloé, for being with us. Welcome, everybody. It's such a great pleasure to introduce Chloé. She's a close colleague. We work together on a European Union project funded by the PRIMA program on advancing non-conventional water management for innovative, climate-resilient water governance in the Mediterranean area. Chloé has a PhD in geography from Université Sorbonne Nouvelle, Paris 3. And her PhD specifically was on the appropriation of water and production of space, the spatial dimension of water rights in the Elqui Valley in Chile. After her PhD, she then started a 2-year postdoc at the Center for Climate and Resilience Research in Chile as well. And based on her PhD and postdoc, first postdoc work, she recently published a book with Presse Universitaire de Rennes, and the book title is Une étude de la dimension spatiale du droit de l'eau au Chili. Without further ado, I'm very honored and happy to introduce you and invite you to the stage. Thank you, Chloé. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Hello, everyone. I am pleased to present my research as part of this webinar. I would like to thank New Wave, Paulina, and Jean-Paul for their invitation. Today, I'm going to share my work on the connection between water scarcity and water security. My research has mainly focused on water sharing and access in the rural areas of South countries. My primary areas of study were Chile and, more recently, Tunisia. The terms water security and water scarcity are sometimes used interchangeably. However, these refer to distinct and complex phenomena. In my research, I critically examined the connection between these 2 concepts. I will begin by providing definitions for each. Let's start with water scarcity. Water scarcity lies at the intersection of natural and social science. It refers to a situation in which water is insufficient to meet the needs of human activities and preserve ecosystems. Water scarcity is a social construct shaped by political, economic, and social processes on various scales. It's crucial to note that the concept of scarcity differs from drought. Drought is defined as a natural risk resulting from a lack of precipitation compared with normal or forecasted conditions. Let's now define water security. The notion of water security involves considering measures implemented to address human, economic, and environmental needs. In my research, I adopt a relational and constructivist definition of water security. This entails avoiding static and quantitative definitions of water access. Water security, such as water scarcity, is a social and political process that is influenced by power dynamics. Water security is also a spatial phenomenon shaped by relationships that operate at multiple scales. That's why my research doesn't solely focus on state measures. I also examine the actions of water organizations and inhabitants. Both contribute to defining rules and actions to enhance water security. The title of this presentation is Water Scarcity Through the Lens of Water Security. However, there exists a tension between these 2 concepts. The first relates to a situation of lack or scarcity, whereas the second refers to ensuring sufficient access. The question at hand is, how do exploring measures implemented to guarantee sufficient water access help us better understand water scarcities? At first glance, one might think that studying water scarcity through the lens of water security involves questioning the effectiveness of the measures or actions taken to ensure water access. However, this would imply the adoption of a normative or positivist stance. And the primary goal of my research is not to evaluate public policies and given recommendations. Instead, my research aims to understand the political and legal process that contribute to the social construction of water scarcity. To achieve this, I analyze the measures implemented to ensure water access and their impact on the production of inequalities. To do that, I examine both concepts through empirical research and comprehensive critical approaches. I wanted to emphasize that when I refer to measures implemented to ensure water access, I'm not solely talking about public policies. I study all rules related to water sharing, encompassing water law in a broad sense. This includes, for instance, constitutional principles, legislative texts, public action instruments, such as those establishing integrated water management, and administrative acts, which determine water right allocation. I also incorporate rules generated locally by water organizations and inhabitants. What is interesting in my approach is that this water law encompasses a set of rules which are strategically produced and used by various actors at different levels. Thus, I go beyond a mere formal analysis of the rules to delve into the practices of water law. In my research, I've explored the connections between water security and scarcity, particularly in the rural areas of semi-arid regions. Why are these areas of heuristic interest in studying water scarcity? First, water scarcity is more frequently naturalized in these regions. The lack of water is frequently attributed to drought, masking political and social phenomena that contribute to water scarcity. This makes the study of social construction of water scarcity particularly interesting. Second, agrarian capitalism has developed significantly. Sunny conditions allow for highly profitable out-of-season agricultural exports. Additionally, there are relatively less populated regions with abundant land and groundwater. Furthermore, historically, these areas have created socio-technical innovations to cope with drought. Users have built water storage and sharing infrastructure to access water despite arid conditions. For instance, by constructing networks of canals or gesture and other innovations. I would like to add one last point. These regions are particularly important in the context of climate change. According to the latest IPCC report, these areas are the most affected by decreased precipitation. The risk of reduced water availability is high, posing a threat to the habitability of these regions and their ecosystems. In this context, securing access to water in rural areas with arid environments presents specific challenges. First, it is challenging to define measures that reconcile the demand between productive activities and domestic use. Maintaining agribusiness activities has become a central focus of economic development, particularly in the South countries. Nevertheless, they also cause significant social and environmental impacts. Second, in these regions, laws and regulations established by states often encounter the presence of local rules developed by user organizations. These organizations are responsible for daily water sharing and maintenance of the infrastructures. Water rights are often conditional on collective work investment or the payment of contribution in those organizations. The plurality of rules produced by those different actors at different levels and the competition between them account for legal pluralism. Finally, ensuring water security in this region is no longer an issue of quantity. Water quality becomes crucial in the context of climate change, as reduced flow rates increase the pollution levels. This situation poses major health and ecosystem risk, particularly affecting isolated inhabitants who are not connected to water networks. The question that I will attempt to answer during my presentation today is as follows. How does the critical study of water security enhance our understanding of the social construction of water scarcity in arid environment? My presentation will be structured into 3 parts. I will sequentially present 3 outcomes that illustrate how the critical study of water security enhances our understanding of water scarcity. I have chosen to focus on different scales in each part. This didactic choice aims to illustrate the connection between water security and water scarcity at the watershed level, rural locality level, and household level. I will illustrate each part with 1 or 2 case studies, and at that point I will present the methodological choices and their contribution to theoretical discussions. During the first part, I will talk about water security and water appropriation at a basin level. Then I will talk about how measuring water security allows us to understand water scarcity in rural localities. And in the last part, I will talk about how ensuring water security in emergencies conduct to the production of water scarcity for inhabitants. In this first part, I will focus on studying the links between water security and water scarcity at the Elqui watershed scale. This section is based on my doctoral research, which was conducted between 2015 and 2019 in Chile. In some studies, the concept of water security is associated with the recognition of private property rights over water. According to these legal or classical economic approaches, recognizing water as an economic good would ensure more efficient water allocation to address scarcity. This idea was propagated globally during the Dublin Conference, marking the legitimization of water neoliberalization policies. Recognizing property right over water and converting it into an economic good should, in principle, strengthen water security. Chile, where I conduct my thesis, is a paradigmatic case of recognizing private property over water rights. The Water Code of 1981 and the Constitution of 1980 established legal conditions for the emergence of water markets. This instrument is considered the most effective means of ensuring efficient water allocation. Both texts were established during the dictatorship, which transformed Chile into a laboratory for neoliberalism. In practice, these texts drastically limit the state's power in water regulation. Additionally, they delegate responsibility for local water management to water right holders gathered within user organizations. When I began my doctoral research, there was a significant consensus in the scientific literature that the Water Code and the Constitution are responsible for water inequalities. They create scarcity for some and abundance for others. Existing studies have described water dispossession by focusing on water market, the role of the state, or the expert knowledge mobilized also by the state. Almost no research has focused on the role of water user organization, which has been studied more in Peru or Ecuador. In Chile, it seems as if the end of peasants also means the end of water communities. In this context, the central hypothesis of my research was that water scarcity cannot be solely explained by the unilateral application of water code and constitution. And based on this, I formulate two second hypotheses. Water scarcity is the result of an extended process that traces its origin back to the second half of 20th century, and water user organizations play a central role in this process. For this study, I applied two methodological approaches. To trace the evolution of legal frameworks and water sharing rules, I consult the national and local archive. I conduct oral history interviews. This allowed me to identify the process explaining the concentration of water by mining, agricultural, and real estate companies since the second half of 20th century. Additionally, I conduct a 9-month ethnographic study in Elqui Valley. This multi-site investigation involved 120 interviews. I focused on studying the two main organizations called Juntas de Vigilancia, Surveillance Board. These are water user organizations responsible for the daily distribution of water from the river to the main irrigation canal. Then water distribution within each canal is managed by smaller water communities. Within this research framework, I focused on the strategic use of water law by actors. I anchored my analysis to the intersection of environmental and legal geography. This field explores the relationship among law, space, and power. I examined actors' relationship with the law at multiple scales and their effects on the production of water scarcity. In other words, I studied the spatial dimension of water law. I demonstrated that unequal access to and relationship with the law explain the disparities in water access. The situation didn't emerge in the 1980 with the water code, or in the 80s with the water code and the constitution. This is a constant phenomenon that has existed since the second half of the 20th century. The water law established from that time onwards has been consistently diverted or misappropriated by economic actors to their advantage, ensuring capital accumulation. This manipulation takes the form of strategic and combined use of law and space. That's why I call geolegal strategies. These geolegal strategies explain the expansion of extractivism, abundance for some, and scarcity for others. I identify three periods during which mining, agricultural, and real estate companies implemented geolegal strategies to increase the profitability of their economic activities despite arid climate conditions. It is important to note that the beginning of a stage doesn't signify the end of the previous stage. Rather, the stage overlap in time. In the first period, geolegal strategies focused on land concentration, to which water rights were still associated. In the second period, strategies shift to water appropriation, now dissociating from land because of the Constitution and Water Code. And finally, in the third period, strategies aim to bypass the increase in environmental regulations from the 19th onward and sustain their activities despite the pollution and overexploitation of water they cause. As you can see in the three timelines for each period, I analyzed the various instruments or rules subject to appropriation strategies by actors. Unfortunately, I don't have time to describe them further here, but if you are interested, these explanations are available in my book, published openly by the Presse Universitaire de Rennes. A second result of my thesis is linked with the role of water user organizations in water appropriation. I showed that leaders of surveillance boards play a role in water appropriation and the rise of extractivism or its resistance. As you remember, these are the two main organizations responsible for the daily distribution of water from the river to the main irrigation canals. I observed that the leaders embraced the concept of water security. Their goal was to secure access to water for their members. However, their role differed. One organization supports extractive sectors, while the other fight against their growth. These differences in economic interest and strategies are explained by the leaders' social origins and activities. The board of the Junta de Vigilancia del Río Elqui, the surveillance board of Elqui River, is composed of the valley's largest farmers. The organization promotes the water market by connecting supply and demand. It also acts as a water bank, selling water from the Puclaro Dam, referred to as Puclaro rights, to repay its debt to the state associated with the dam's construction. Acquiring these rights guarantees buyers the privilege of higher water flow. Extractive companies have the capacity to buy these rights and thus secure access. But at the same time, the surveillance board advises water community leaders to cut off water for users who don't pay their dues. The board also cut water off to communities indebted to it. These cutoffs lead to what I have called dispossession through indebtedness. The resulting scarcity mainly affects poor users. Conversely, the surveillance board of Derecho River protects the interest of local peasantry. This discourages small irrigators from selling their water rights to large farmers, particularly by preventing their connections. At the same time, it encourages the regularization of all water rights. Scholars in Chile have analyzed the regularization as water privatization because it dissociated water from land, but in this case, it is a tactic to defend water rights in case of death before judicial institutions. Similarly, the surveillance board established a protect park upstream of the valley to prevent the installation of mining activities. To conclude, these results indicate that it's not the unilateral application of the water code and constitution that generates scarcity in Chile. This legal perspective would reproduce what Pierre Bourdieu termed legal formalism and functionalism. On one hand, water law has been diverted by economic actors in the valley since the second half of the 20th century for the development of their activities. And on the other hand, water organizations play a central role in the construction of scarcity and resistance to it. Contrary to all expectations, securing access rights within a neoliberal framework through the recognition of private property is sometimes chosen as a resistance strategy. Furthermore, dispossession practices are based on local informal rules that are not necessarily linked to the national legal framework, such as the water market produced by the surveillance board of Rio Elqui. Sorry. In the second part of my presentation, I will focus on the critical examination of water security indicators to better understand water scarcity in rural areas. This research was applied to cases that are sometimes not located in semi-arid regions. You will see. Water security was also addressed by scholars in the creation of indicators. These quantitative indicators aim to better assess the water security levels over space and time. They are presented as decision-making tools for mitigating the risk of water scarcity. But as I have mentioned in the introduction, these indicators rely on static and often quantitative definition of water security. However, research on political ecology offers a critical perspective on water security. They argue that this notion has been depoliticized and detached from studies on inequalities. They emphasize the importance of addressing the question, secure access to water for whom and for what purpose. Therefore, they adopt a relational definition of water security. I have contributed to this approach during my first postdoctoral position in Chile. I created a composite indicator of water security at the interface of community organization responsible for the distribution of drinking water and household in rural areas. I defined water security at this interface as the ability of a committee to provide sufficient quantity and quality of water to the household of its members, while maintaining the principles of democratic management for the future, including the integration of new residents. This definition led to the creation of a composite indicator with 7 dimensions. To ensure that the rural population with access to water network can obtain a sufficient quantity and quality of water, 7 hydrosocial processes are interconnected. These processes define the socio-technical modes of water distribution from the intake point to the household connections. So, the first 2 processes reflect the committee's ability to access water resources in sufficient quantity and quality at the basin level, whether in groundwater or surface water. Process 3, 4, and 5 describe the management of the service by committees up to the household connection, ensuring quantity, quality, and continuity. The number 5 establishes the economic strength of community management. Process 6 and 7 reveals the committee's relationship with other actors at different scales. Process 6 describes the level of support and knowledge for service maintenance. And the final hydrosocial process, number 7, concerns the legal and institutional robustness of the committee and its ability to plan for the future. In Chile, this involves the committee's ability to continue its activities within the framework of the law regarding within the framework of the new law on rural water services. Okay. From a methodological standpoint, the uniqueness of the composite indicator is that it was developed from primary sources. Qualitative data were collected through interviews with committee leaders. Each process was then translated into multiple questions forming an interview grid with 7 axes. The application of the interview grid was enriched with interviews with inhabitants and on-site observations. We applied it into 10 committees chosen based on a representative sample reflecting the diversity of committees in Chile. Several key findings have emerged from this comparison. I will briefly present the most important ones here. First, There was no correlation between the size of the committees and the level of water security. This is a significant point as it contradicts assumptions guiding decision making. The Chilean state prioritizes assistance based on committee size. Second, committees facing difficulties accessing water resources don't necessarily experience higher water insecurity. These results highlight the importance of committee service management to ensure household access to water. Committees compensate for these difficulties through effective service management, knowledge, and support networks. In this regard, there is a correlation between committee size and support networks. The comparison also highlights the common difficulties faced by committees in ensuring water security. We delved deeper into the analysis of 3 cases representing rural localities with environmental amenities that attract urban populations. One is located in the southern coastal region, another in the semi-arid mountains, and the last one in the countryside near Santiago de Chile. In these cases, water scarcity is explained by the ambivalent role of the states in rural localities. The states contribute to building attractiveness by financing large development projects. However, it doesn't invest in improving water networks managed by committees. Increased attractiveness has led to an increase in the number of inhabitants per household or housing unit in the localities. This surge in demand has saturated the committee networks. To ensure access to already connected households, the states enforce committee to stop connecting new households, but it do so in the name of the water security, instead of investing in storage facilities or networks. And the problem is that in response, households seek solutions to cope with water scarcity. In some cases, they seek individual access through drilling or water courses. In other cases, they connect to network illegally or through arrangements with neighbors. The problem is that household response increase pressure on the network or in the aquifer or water courses. This, in turn, contributes to water scarcity at the micro-basin scale. To conclude with this second part, I can say that the indicator contributes on several fronts to the literature. First, it applies to an analysis scale that has been explored less by scholars, the rural localities. Second, this indicator enables the production of original local data at the interface between committees and households. Previously, indicators had separately assessed the action capabilities of committees and the water security levels of residents. Moreover, the indicator can be a complementary tool to hydrological assessment that analyze the supply capacity of microbasins. And finally, the indicator doesn't aim to identify the characteristic of an effective committee that could serve as a model from which solutions could be extracted for replication in other contexts. It also doesn't intend to rank or assess each committee's effectiveness. The indicator aims to identify specific hydrosocial processes that explain water security levels in different cases. This facilitates problem diagnosis and formulation of recommendations tailored to each situation and similar circumstances. At the same time, the indicator allows comparison to draw more generalizable conclusions, extending beyond the result of in-depth case studies. Okay. In the last part of my presentation, I will now discuss the emergency measures taken to ensure water security and its effects on water scarcity of inhabitants. In the event of a disaster or environmental crisis, the state or municipalities urgently intervene to ensure access to water for affected populations. These are reactive decisions aimed at providing a quick solution to affected communities. Such decisions can be made by authorities at different levels. The proposed solution often rely on alternative or new techniques. I will focus on cistern trucks in Chile and water reuse and water harvesting in Tunisia. Several studies have examined the action taken following a crisis, focusing mainly on the solution implemented by governments. For instance, the foundational works of Turton and Olson distinguish between first, second, and third order shortages to which states respond with supply, demand, or water reallocation policies. Since the framework of political ecology, researchers have demonstrated that emergencies tend to favor the neoliberalization of normative frameworks. Furthermore, it has been shown that exceptional situations justify hasty decision-making by the state that doesn't adhere to administrative and democratic procedures. This can lead to unequal treatment and the law, resulting in inequalities. On the other hand, the new or called non-conventional water distribution systems implemented to provide water in emergencies have also been studied. This term refers to innovations created for the production of so-called new waters, for example, through a desalinization or water reuse. The innovative aspect, and thus qualified as unconventional, of the solution depends on the geographical context and established practices. In other words, what is unconventional in one basin may be entirely common and thus conventional in another. Unconventional water are often presented as future solutions to address water shortage, especially in arid and semi-arid regions. From the perspective of political ecology, several studies have shown that they constitute techno-triumphalist solutions based on depoliticized discourse mobilized to reproduce economic interests. Through two distinct case studies in Chile and Tunisia, my research examined the effects of emerging measures taken to ensure water security on the water access of users. I demonstrated that these solutions not only fail to meet the needs of the population, but also indirectly contribute to the reproduction of processes that produce water scarcity. The first examples come from the analysis of Kebir basin located between Algeria and Tunisia, conducted within my current postdoctoral research. Governments have made unconventional water production a central focus of their policies to address the decline in water availability due to the climate change. The desalinization of seawater and reuse of treated water are presented as future solutions to improve water security. However, our research shows that these policies reproduce regional development disparities, and that the lack of a solution in the Kebir basin reinforces the race for groundwater. In fact, if we look at the numbers, the announced water transitions need to be nuanced because the volumes produced by desalination and wastewater reuse remain relatively low. This transition is not accompanied by a decrease in demand. In contrast, it complements more water-intensive uses for industry and agriculture. Furthermore, the geography of unconventional waters reveals that the locations of unconventional water are in economically and demographically dynamic regions. These decisions reinforce regional development disparities and, more importantly, relegate arid and semi-arid regions, which will be more severely affected by climate change. The problem is that these regions are highly attractive for agribusiness because of the level of the sunlight and the presence of water in aquifers. A more in-depth case study of the Kebir basin illustrates another type of limitation of the unconventional water measures. In this basin, investment in unconventional water are insufficient and in some cases inadequate. There is only one wastewater reuse solution in Tunisia with no investment in on the Algerian side. The Gafsa water treatment plant has been expanded recently, but the majority of the treated water is directed to a local phosphate production industry, not to farmers. Moreover, the water quality is inadequate for agricultural use because it cannot come into contact with crops in the Gafsa oasis. Therefore, these emergency measures are insufficient and unsuitable. Simultaneously, there is potential for the rehabilitation of small and medium-scale facilities based on rainwater harvesting or aquifer recharge, as for instance, Gessour, Mescat, and Fogaras. But Algerian and Tunisian states don't invest sufficiently in these water harvesting solutions. Owing to the absence of collective and state solution, inhabitants turn to the extraction of currently overexploited groundwater. This situation reflects the indirect effects of inadequate water security measures in semi-arid rural environments. My last example will focus on the response to water scarcity through the use of cistern trucks. This mechanism was not widespread in Chile before the combined effect of mega drought and water appropriation regimes. The gradual disappearance or contamination of streams and the depletion of aquifer forced municipal, regional, or national authorities to intervene urgently by distributing water through cistern trucks. In some cases, extractive companies also, as part of their social responsibility, distribute water to mitigate their actions. The cistern trucks is indeed an emergency unconventional device. It is meant to be temporary, funded by exceptional means to transport water to places with exceptional characteristics. However, it has become the norm today in rural Chile, especially during the summer, when it is common to see cistern trucks transporting water throughout the country. The affected population were mainly isolated households that were not connected to water network. In these families, water is used for consumption, hygiene, irrigation, and also for animals. This normalization of cistern trucks posed two problems. First, the proposed means are insufficient to meet the diversity of needs, averaging only 50 liters per person per day. Moreover, there are risks of water pollution when the water is stored and bad in reservoirs and poorly maintained. Second, as this mode of access becomes normalized, The legal framework defining the water appropriation regime has not been modified. The recognition of ownership right to water outlined in the Constitution remains in force despite constitutional process and the recent water crisis. Furthermore, the Law on Rural Sanitation Service doesn't offer a solution for isolated rural households or households not connected to water committees networks. To conclude, it seems that emergency measures to ensure water security for population are finally reproducing factors that lead to water scarcity. In some instances, these measures favor highly water-consuming productive activities, as is the case in Tunisia. And in Chile, palliative measures don't address the root cause of the water scarcity problem. Yes, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chloe. It was really great to hear your presentation and to also see a proper insight into the papers that you worked on, into the research you've done. It's always very exciting to be able to learn a little bit more and get a bit of a more insight, so to say, into the process. So for the participants of the session, we kindly invite any questions into the chat. And in the meantime, perhaps I could ask a question from myself. And I was wondering if maybe we could paddle back to the very basics of this idea of constructing water scarcity. So perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on this difference between water shortage, water scarcity, the biophysical versus socially constructed. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about that and how you perceived it in your research?
Yes, for sure. But I think the main point to keep in mind is when we work on water access is to understand that water scarcity is not a natural phenomenon. It's clear. The climate change has effect on water availability, and it is something that it is true, and we can't say that it's not real. But at the same time, there are a lot of complex processes at play which have an effect on water scarcity, such as a political process, economical interest, as I show, actors who use law for defend their interest, and we have to study both complementary to understand which are the roots of the problem of water scarcity. Yes.
Thank you so much. There's some questions from the audience. So the first question is about specifically the distribution of water in rural arid areas through the cistern tracks. And the question is about essentially the practicalities of it. So specifically, one of the participants is asking, are communities not paying exorbitant prices for water delivered this way? How many liters per day per person can be delivered? Who manages it? So essentially, how is this organized to ensure that it's done in a just and fair way? Thank you, Chloe.
Yes. At the beginning, it was an emergency measure financed by the state, and the state give the fund to the region, and the region to the municipalities, and the municipalities were in charge of distribute water to inhabitants. And there was a decree which established 50 liters per person per day, but the Supreme Court established a decision and says that it's not sufficient, that it should be 100 liters per person per day. But in fact, when you are in the field and you do interviews, you can see that it's very difficult to distribute in rural areas, very isolated, such a volume of water for person at the household level. So in fact, the reality is that it depends on the capacity of the municipality to have a cistern truck, to organize the distribution, and also the capacity of the inhabitants to buy and have a reservoir to keep the volume of water. And the price, it is financed by the state, but now as it is becoming very normal, and sometimes the state deliver water to the committees, and then the committees distribute this water by their networks to the inhabitants. And when it is like this, the people just pay the water price by month, the normal water price. Is it something very, it is more expensive for the state to deliver water by cistern truck than by the committees and the networks.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very good and in detail answer. There's another question about one of your case studies, specifically talking about Chile. And it's a dual question, so to say. The first part is whether we can say that the informal markets, water markets in Chile that were existing since 1945 were actually formalized through the introduction of the Water Code of 1981. And linked to that is also the question whether we can say that Water Code enhanced the inequality in water access when keeping in mind the importance of agro-exploitation in Chilean economy.
Sorry, I can understand you very, very well, but the first question is relative with but could you repeat, please? The first,
yeah, don't worry. Yes. So the first one is, can we say that there were the informal water markets in Chile were there since 1945, and that Water Code of 1981 just formalized them? And the second one is whether the Water Code enhanced the inequality in water access, considering the importance of agro-exploitation in Chilean economy. So specific focus on Chile for those two questions.
Yes, yes. Regarding the water market, it's something very complicated, but what I can say is that, and I am not the anthropologist who studied water market in other countries also says that when in semi-arid region is very common to sell water and buy water. So what I can say is that yes, the Water Code of 1981 tried to implement water market, formalize the water market following ideologies about water proposed by some lower and economists, classic, no, and it caused a lot of problems. But it is also important to know that informal practices exist before the 1981 Water Code and the Constitution, and maybe even if we change the Constitution and the Water Code, probably they would still exist such of selling and of water and appropriation processes. It is not then simple than just changing the water code and the constitution. That's my point. Yes.
So much. There's a question about the politics, so to say, the political processes when it comes to managing water. So there's a question about the legacy of Chicago Boys, whether the reforms that happened that were very much shaped within the neoliberal agenda, are they still visible in contemporary water governance in Chile? And linked to that, I would also add whether certain political interests can be influencing decisions of local governments. So do you see the impact of politics on how decisions are made and how water is governed? And if so, what's the reaction to it?
From the Chicago Boys?
Yes, so one of the questions asked specifically about Chicago Boys, and the other question is about the general politics influencing decision making.
Yes, but in the case of Chile is very sadness case for the water governments, because in fact the application of the neoliberalism in all the life and in all the policies have an effect at different level of governance of water. And yes, all the water governments now will be has been defined by this guideline of neoliberalism, and it has have a lot of effects that I have studied in the sharing of water, and a lot of I couldn't explain it in details during my presentation, but the law of irrigation or other law who has an effect in the water sharing is shaped by the neoliberalism focus, you know. So, and that's what it has produced a lot of inequalities and dispossession process, yes. With also in parallel, it's not just water government, it's also agribusiness development, it is also mining development, so it is all the society has been affected by this drastic and violent change.
Right. Thank you so much, Chloe. Thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. The session is now coming to an end, and I want to thank the audience also for being with us today and for participating.